There was a study in California. They compared a group involved in the village and a group not, and this went over, I think, 5 years. And I remember hearing that people who are engaged in the village movement remain in their community, was it 2 years longer than their cohorts? Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a really big deal if you multiply that times the entire adult population and the typical kind of spending pattern for caring for older adults, and times the quality of the later life course. My name's Ed Elberfeld. I'm a long-term resident of German Village, and about 8 or 9 years ago, I was on the long-range planning committee of the German Village Society, and one of the members of the committee brought an article from the New York Times about the Beacon Hill Village and said, do you think we should do something like this? We invited people from a couple of villages to come to speak to us because it was obvious that the older adult population was growing very rapidly, and pretty much nobody wanted to leave the village. So we connected to the Village to Village Network, which was very, very useful to us. And I invited my neighbors and members of that committee to form a board. And we launched, it'll be 6 years ago in January. Our indication from looking at the best practices and villages that succeeded is that those villages that succeeded had a paid position, an executive director. And we determined that we couldn't hire someone until we had the money in the bank to pay them. And so it took about, a good chunk of that year to do fundraising. And when we launched, we had an executive director and immediately had 30 members. And now, 6 years coming up in January, we're probably going to have 200 members.
And what is your membership fee?
We have two types of members. We have regular members who receive services. In other words, they call, they get a ride, they get yard cleanup, they get a light bulb changed at the top of the stairs, they get heavy objects moved. So a single person is $500, a two-person household is $750. We quickly ran into a lot of people who liked the idea and told us sometime we want to be part of this, but you can't put that in the bank. So we came up with a social membership, which is $125 for a one or two person household. And the social members come to our social events, form part of the cadre of our volunteers, are happily supporting the organization while receiving no direct services other than the social events. And it's been a great boon to our budget. And the social membership fee is tax deductible, so it's really a donation, but it includes membership and it includes a community of people that support us. It also allows us to have about 20% of our members on scholarship. What do you call it?
I think we could say either one. People receive a scholarship for a subsidized membership.
Yes, and so the social memberships and grants and other fundraising has allowed us to maintain that because even though we are a membership organization, we don't want to exclude people, and there are people to whom our fee would be a detriment to their joining.
Donald, you're the executive director. Can you explain what your role is?
Okay, my name is Donald Wiggins, and I'm the executive director for Village Connections. And I facilitate the day-to-day operations of the organization. I work with our volunteer base to ensure that we have people to provide the services for our members. I also, with Christine's help from the Greater Village, opportunities for us to grow financial resources for all of us through grants and major funders.
So I am Christine Happel, and we began our village in 2015. And we found that there was a growing need for a different type of service in the community. And so some of our community members actually began to research information about the village. They had heard of Beacon Hill as well. And then, of course, Village Connections paved the way. And so began to see how this model could really successfully be adapted in the Clintonville, Beachwald, and University District neighborhoods of the city. And over the last 4.5 years have really grown not only in membership, but in the range of programming that we're able to offer. So very full social calendar that includes health and wellness, educational activities, as well as a very large menu of services. And in 2018, we formed the Greater Columbus Network of Villages, which consists of 5 village programs here in Columbus, and allows us to collaborate on funding. So one thing is that we are all small neighborhood organizations, so it's hard to attract funding when you're saying, I want this much money to focus on 3 neighborhoods. It's a lot easier if we all come together and say we have 15 neighborhoods that we want funding for. And it just also shows collaboration. So we share a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge. For example, any village member across the city could participate in a social activity offered by another village. So one example of this is Village in the Ville has a robust Tai Chi program. And so our member who volunteers his time to offer Tai Chi to members has then gone out to each of the other villages and helped not only provide Tai Chi classes for them, but then helping those organizations get their own personal Tai Chi programs off the ground. And so that's just one really great way that we're able to collaborate. And so the network's kind of there to foster that collaboration. We have been advocates for having a paid position for each of the villages. We do find that is beneficial. However, I think the volunteer component, the villages couldn't run without a really strong volunteer base.
One of the great things about the village movement, I think, and is been that it's recognized that there are older adults with time and with education and with some basic income and are able to serve other members of our community who may not have those resources. And so in a way, it's older adults helping other older adults. And the great thing about the village is that the executive director and the organization brings the volunteers to the people that need the help. That's kind of organizing volunteers would be, kind of our main skill, because someone in their early retirement time will be thinking about this more seriously and looking around and seeing that this is a way that you can imagine staying in your home and paying it forward and hoping that there will be something there that will help you in your later life course.
Is it possible to have a low-income village?
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
We have a brand new one.
We have 3 here in Columbus.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about, we have a brand new one on the Near East Side, which is all low income. The demographics of the area is all low income. We started one in this summer. We opened one on the west side of Columbus, and it falls under the Shalom Zone, which focuses on underserved individuals. The interesting thing to me about this concept is Christine's Village has great disparity in income. They have very low income people, and they have people off the charts that live in her area.
I think that's been the kind of an early criticism of the village movement. It started in Beacon Hill, a very well-off community, and was adopted early on by many university communities. Initially we had 0 kind of funding outside of our community. And now it's become fairly obvious that there is a growing need there, and the governmental agencies and the private foundations are saying, well, here is an organization or a method that kind of works, that makes sense on a lot of ways. And so now it's become somewhat, I won't say easier to start a village, but the path is better understood. And that's why we're very anxious to support why and you're the head of this, aren't you? The city group of villages. and why it's very important. I'm speaking to you now, actually.
Yeah.
It's very important that these lower income communities are able to succeed. Otherwise, we'll be stuck with this rap forever, and that will be an impediment to our moving forward. And I think part of that is this community recognizes that there needs to be something in every community, not just the well-off communities. And I think that Columbus is going to prove that axiom wrong, that it's only in well-off communities.
I love the fact that members are actually volunteers as well. It's a very, it makes for a very rich environment. I think our greatest challenge for all of us is being careful that we don't grow so large that we can't maintain the things that are making us special and make us work right now. You know, we're taking a hard look at that right now. How many members can we actually service? We have 58 right now that we provide services for, which is, it's a lot. I mean, we just had this year, I just did a little thank you. We've done over 500 transportation requests this year. That's more than one a day.
205 members.
We have 205 members. That is inclusive of our social members as well. 58 of those 205 receive services.
So how many of those are providing services?
We have about 63 volunteers. So I don't know, Christine, what's your mix like?
Yeah, so we have about 40 designated Village volunteers. 48% of Village in the Villes members are also volunteers, right? But part of my role is to really grow a volunteer relationship with someone who's going to dedicate time to the Village specifically and understand our mission, get to know our members, because that's one of the differences with the Village is that we really try to emphasize the importance of relationships. And so I gave you that age and place term earlier, but we don't really use that anymore. We say age and community because it's all about feeling a part of where you're living and having those relationships. We know very much that relationships are an important part of how well you age, not only to feel included and to have friendships, but also that these people support you. So I always encourage members to get in touch with me. Most commonly, too, is transportation. That's a bulk of our services as well.
You have people that are lonely. How do you deal with figuring out that somebody needs that?
Yeah, it's building that rapport. So I find that my members are actually pretty honest with me about their needs, and that has come with time and attention and getting to know the members. And sometimes you can just tell. So as a social worker, I'm have some skills in being able to pick up on someone's needs. And so offering something and seeing if someone takes advantage of that offer too can be really helpful.
I'll say one of the greatest surprises to me, I did not realize how important the social aspect would be. Many older adults are isolated in their homes and it's not healthy. It's the opposite of that. It's very unhealthy. And it is so gratifying to find ways, and there's no one way, to reconnect folks to their neighbors and to other parts of the community. We have a lot of social activities, but the friendly visit is our way to connect to people who won't come to things or are not comfortable coming to things. And so it's important to look down that list and see, not only who's coming to events, who's connecting, but also see who isn't and kind of make that extra step to get there. And I would hope that every village would recognize that and make it an important part of their organization.
You know what? They'll call and say, thank you so much. Or I have their children call me and say, thank you so much for getting Mom out of the house. She's a much different person when I come on Saturday to take her to the grocery store than she was last week when you guys weren't out with her. So we know collectively that work, as Christine mentioned, is just getting people out and into an environment where they're not sitting in their homes with their drapes drawn and their television on. And you just don't, until you're involved in this work, you don't really know that is so is such a big issue out there.
I know you can't have data, but anecdotally, how many people do you think are living in community that might not be able to without the Village Network?
So apocryphally, okay, back to non-statistical, the time that we were setting up our village, one of my good friends and neighbors who has some major health problems, she's not ambulatory, she needs a lot of help. She said, Ed, I'm thinking about moving to a nice retirement community. And I said, well, next month we're going to get this village thing started. Why don't you give us a shot? She said, well, I need a lot of help. And I said, well, we'll see. I've never done this either. We'll see if we can do that. So this is one of our members who does need a lot of help. And you know, some people need a lot more than others. 6 years later, she's still living by herself in her home, bars around the house, various amenities that are now becoming available to older adults living at home, and a multitude of services. And she is so grateful, and she is so adapted now to staying in her community that I don't see it changing.
No, she was the first one in the door at the Christmas lunch last week.
Yeah. Our first member, too, will famously tell people that she had her room picked out at her chosen retirement community. It was booked. She was packing her bags, and then our Village in the Ville popped up, and, you know, she put everything back on the shelves and has stayed in her home, and she's awesome.
For all of our lives, we've known the older adult next to us or across the street, and as neighbors, we've gone over to help. But I think the great thing about the Village movement is now I am going 10 blocks away to help someone that I might not have known. Part of that has to do with technology. We can bring, you know, with the internet, a group together. We can connect volunteers. We can connect needs and kind of put them together. Even though the person receiving the services may not have the internet, we have ways of communicating, cell phone, all this, email that makes it, and smart software that manages these connections. I think coming at a time when the time is ripe. Not only do we have an increased need, we also have increased tools to make this kind of thing happen, because the reality is it's going to be all hands on deck, you know, in the next 20 or 30 years, seeing the numbers that we have. So it certainly makes sense to have this in every neighborhood as a component of the later life course. And I hope that that's why I'm willing to go anywhere to speak to people about this.
I have a volunteer who volunteers tirelessly with us. And I said, why and how do you give all this time? She said, I've met 2 really good friends in the members that I service, and they now do things like they go to the opera and they go to the theater and on off times. And the member will then say, I want to let you know that so-and-so came and took me to the thing. They want them to know that these guys are doing these things for them. But she said, I would have never met either one of these people had it not been for Village Connections.
It's even very much how we've grown the village. Our best advocates are our members, and that word of mouth. I have one member in particular who everywhere she goes, she spreads the good word of the village. She carries brochures in her purse, and even most recently at the checkout line in Target, noticed a woman who was waiting for a taxi or some kind of transportation. She offered the woman a ride home on the way, told her all about the village, and this woman's now a member. So it's having someone who's experienced and lived it themselves as proof that really helps us kind of grow.
Let me ask, just in your observation, or maybe you have data, can you just list out the things that contribute to the long-term health of the members?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that if there is a silver bullet, and there isn't, it's probably physical activities. Hard to get that going, but our members, we have one member we take to the fitness club 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and the other day she goes swimming. So, and she's
She just had her 89,000 mile checkup, and the doctor said that she was 89 because she is keeping herself physically fit.
so walking groups, the Tai Chi. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So those kinds of activities, which are maybe the hardest to sell, but getting people out of the house, the social activities are also kind of very, very important. And
It's
another
important.
important thing, and I know you'll all agree, is since we are volunteer driven and many of our members are also volunteers, giving that sense of purpose. Nothing better for your soul and your health than helping your neighbor. And so people feel that they are helping, they have a purpose. The person down the street needs them, they better be healthy and ready to go. And that's extremely important.
And minimizing stress too. I think knowing that you have a support network, you have someone to call, that you're not going to be caught out in the dark alone, is important too. Did you have? You've jumped, Ed.
No, I just remember somebody's lights went out, and I had to, it's been a long time since I actually screwed a fuse in.
I got that
But
call.
we had
Like, I
to,
don't even know what a fuse box is.
but I kind of remembered from my youth, and there are people, we typically hope that people will call in advance of their needs, but truly we like to also be kind of a safety net for
I had
things like that.
a couple members whose heat went out last winter, and it was the furnace broke, so they still had electricity. And a neighbor just down the street really helps care for them, and he brought over space heaters and blankets, and then invited them over for dinner and opened their house to these other members who live real close. And so yeah, just a thing that could have been catastrophic was just a somewhat uncomfortable weekend in the cold.
Makes them feel like they have an advocate, right?
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that I see, especially with our older members, is they don't have anybody here. Maybe their children live on opposite ends of the country, but the need is immediate.
And I think having a peer support group to lean on for information and understanding and just sharing one's woes, it can be really, really helpful as well. And two, just some of the nuts and bolts things of getting older. So Medicare is infinitely challenging to navigate, and so that people can come to me, but also to one another to learn about processes, and even just to say this is awful and we all hate this and it's been horrible for everyone. Just to have that.
And this is another reason I think the village movement is rapidly growing. In earlier times, one of the family members might have been right there in the community with mom or mom and pop. In this era, people move not only all over the country, but all over the world, and are not necessarily right there on the farm to help mom and pop. And there's also a growth of non-traditional families who might not have, might not have that kind of traditional hierarchy of help. And I think that looking to the community has been very beneficial, and trying to meet the needs of the era where kids don't live there or the family is not traditional has been very gratifying to be able to do that.